So 2024 was not only a fantastic year for JRPGs, but rather a fantastic year for JRPG remakes, with the likes of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Persona 3 Reload, and Dragon Quest 2D HD Remake. Us JRPG fans were eating pretty well in 2024 to say the least. And with me being as greedy as I am, all of these remakes kinda got me thinking, what other JRPG would I want to see remade next? So on today's episode of Fantasy Kingdom, we'll be focusing on that very topic as I give you guys 10 JRPGs that I want to see get a remake the most. Oh, and this should be obvious, but I won't be including any JRPGs on this list that have already been confirmed to get a remake at some point. But before we get started, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more JRPG content. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Fantasy Kingdom, and this is the top 10 JRPGs that need a remake right now. Let's get it. Number 10, Dragon Quest VIII, Journey of the Cursed King. When I first thought about what games to include on this list, my attention immediately towards two major JRPG franchises. One of those franchises we'll talk about later on with today's list, but the other one was none other than Dragon Quest. This is a series that I have yet to fully play through, with me only playing through 4 games so far, but it's one of those games that I think would be perfect for the remake treatment. See, my first Dragon Quest was Dragon Quest VIII, Journey of the Cursed King. After pushing myself through the brutal grind and finding myself lost or stuck on multiple occasions, Dragon Quest VIII to this day remains one of my favorite JRPGs of all time. Something about the spirit of this game, the unique characters, and the incredible art direction from the late anime legend himself, Akira Toriyama, Dragon Quest VIII was one of 2 JRPGs on the PlayStation 2 that really pulled me back into the genre. I know that this is one of those games that surprisingly still holds up in terms of the visuals, and it probably makes more sense for this game to get a remaster for modern consoles instead, but I don't know guys, with the franchise getting more and more popular and Square Enix already cranking out their resources on Final Fantasy Remake, why not try remaking a popular Dragon Quest remake that's not a 2D HD remake and see how it performs. Number 9, Grandia. Here's a franchise I just feel like doesn't get enough attention, even though the first 2 games of the series are well respected by the JRPG community. While I can't really say much about the first game as I've never played it, I played Grandia 2 on the Dreamcast, may that system rest in peace, and I gotta say, this is a criminally underrated turn-based JRPG. With the amount of twists in the story, interesting characters, and insane enemy types, Grandia 2 was a phenomenal JRPG that has a deep connection with me. So I would love to see this franchise revived in the form of a remake of the original game. Now to address the elephant in the room, I'm aware of the remaster collection that we got a few years back. And even though I haven't had the chance to check it out yet, I know, shame on me, I still think this is a franchise that could really use a full-blown remake treatment. This is a series that I really believe could do extremely well in today's market if we saw some love and care thrown its way, and it's why I decided to include it on today's list despite the recent remaster collection that we've received. Number 8, Final Fantasy VIII. As foreshadowed earlier on today's video, Final Fantasy was the other franchise that I thought about when I first started to make this list. And honestly speaking, there's a lot of entries to choose from. Obviously, any game released after Final Fantasy XII doesn't really need a remake treatment. And the first 6 games of the series got an HD pixel remaster a few years back. And while Final Fantasy VI is an entry that could make a strong case for the remake treatment, my attention instead turns towards one of my favorite games of the series, Final Fantasy VIII. Sure, this game isn't as good as Final Fantasy VII or even Final Fantasy X for that matter, but it's still a strong JRPG that, in my opinion, is in desperate need of a remake. Actually, after Final Fantasy VII Remake was first announced, I immediately thought that Final Fantasy VIII would be the next one to go into development, but then we learned that Final Fantasy VII Remake would be a 3-part story. So yeah, that kinda shut that down. Still, Final Fantasy VIII is extremely deserving of a remake with one of the better stories of the series. A main character that I absolutely love who wields a sword almost as badass as Cloud's Buster sword, and it's a game that plays on my love of dogs. Damn, I love the Australian Shepherd. The main issue that needs to be addressed here is the surprisingly complex combat system that definitely could use a rework in the remake. Number 7, Skies of Arcadia. If you're a fan of pirates, Skies of Arcadia is a JRPG that I highly recommend to you. Considering that one of my favorite Disney movies of all time is Treasure Planet, Skies of Arcadia is right up my alley. Now it's possible that we could see a remaster or even a remake for the game in the near future, as Sega just recently renewed its trademark for the game. But as we all know, that doesn't always mean what we think it means. Anyway, this game has currently appeared on the Dreamcast and the GameCube, and it was arguably the best game during the short lifespan of the Dreamcast in my opinion. I love this game, and to get to fully explore and play through my fantasies of being a pirate in JRPG format, but with improved visuals, is something that I am all about. The world and places you get to explore are just gorgeous. The character development with not only the main cast, but the side characters as well is top notch. And the story is one of the most heartfelt stories in a JRPG that I've ever come across. Outside of updated visuals and modern controls, probably the most beneficial thing that Skies of Arcadia could receive with a remake would be the voice acting, because let's face it, it wasn't that good sadly. Number 6, Tales of Phantasia. Here's another JRPG on this list I actually haven't played, but as a new fan of the Tales series, with me currently about 4 or 5 games into the series, Tales of Phantasia is the game that I want to see remade the most in the franchise. This action JRPG franchise has always stood out from other JRPGs, even since it first hit the scene back in 1995. The way the combat system is used in these games combines free roam action RPG mechanics with similarities to turn-based attacks, making the series have its very own niche within a very popular genre. And honestly speaking, there's a lot of games within this iconic franchise that could use a remake. Tales of Symphonia, while we just got a remaster of, is one that I believe would make a good remake. Tales of the Abyss is one of the more popular games of the franchise that have yet to see any love in the remaster or remake department. But ultimately, I went with this game, the game that started the entire franchise, Tales of Phantasia. As I've only maybe played 30 minutes of the game and gave up on it due to it being very difficult to jump back into all of these years later, I personally can't speak too much about the game itself, except that I don't believe it aged very well at all. Plus, after seeing that the Legend of Heroes series is going back to the very start of the franchise to remake its first game, Trails in the Sky, I figured that it would be a really great idea for the Tales series to do the very same thing, right? Maybe this is just me being biased as I just couldn't get past the first 30 minutes of the original game, but I would really like to see Tales of Phantasia remade so that I could really appreciate the game that started this iconic franchise for my very first time. Number 5, The Legend of Dragoon. If you want to talk about an older JRPG that has a lot of potential, then look no farther than The Legend of Dragoon. I remember playing this game on the PlayStation and how I was just blown away by how visually impressive this game looked. I mean, it even gave Final Fantasy VII a run for its money in my opinion. Of course, years later, with this same version being ported over to the PS5, it's clear to see that this game has not aged well at all. The weird and annoying combat system, rough around the edges, visuals in today's age, and overall a game that definitely doesn't look or play as well as we remember. Still, there's so much potential for this game, and that's exactly why I have it on today's list. For one, the world is arguably the most beautiful and most creative in terms of the set designs. Seriously, from the vibrant landscapes to the extremely creative designs of the towns of the game, The Legend of Dragoon has the potential to be the most exciting world to explore in a JRPG if it gets the remake treatment. The enemy types are still extremely interesting, and the story is one of the more complex yet satisfying stories seen in a JRPG. I can't really stop talking about how good this original game is, and if it were to get a remake in the form of, say, Final Fantasy VII type of remake, then The Legend of Dragoon seriously has the potential to be one of the best action JRPGs of this generation if done right. Number 4, Xenogears. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about anything that I'm about to say about this next game, as it's another JRPG that I haven't played, but Xenogears is one of the most sought after JRPGs that fans want to see remade the most. For me specifically, it has me intrigued by the fact that this is the game that sort of started another JRPG series that I'm absolutely in love with, Xenoblade Chronicles. From what I understand, Xenogears and Xenoblade are loosely connected to each other in the form of Easter eggs and whatnot, but have never been officially confirmed as the same series. Again, as someone that has never played Xenogears, feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm mistaken. Anyway, with this in mind, I was intrigued about Xenogears to the point I started to research the game, and man, this game looks extremely unique. Unlike a lot of the JRPGs on this list, Xenogears takes a more sci-fi-like approach with its aesthetics and set pieces and gives us a truly unique experience within the JRPG genre. The game is praised as one of the better JRPGs mainly for its storytelling, innovative gameplay mechanics, and character development. As someone that has yet to play this game, Xenogears getting a remake could very well be the thing that finally draws me into this iconic JRPG for the first time. Full disclosure, I don't know if I'll ever find myself exploring this game anytime soon if it doesn't get a remake treatment. So here's to hoping that a newbie to the series like myself finally gets that remake that we have all been waiting for. Number 3, Golden Sun. One of my favorite video games on the Game Boy Advance was a small, underrated JRPG known as Golden Sun. For whatever reason, this game just really connected with me when I was having difficulty finding games to play on the Advance other than Pokemon and Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. Thankfully, Golden Sun really locked me into it with its dynamic turn-based mechanics and its complex yet satisfying story. For the gameplay, you saw a lot of unique features in this JRPG that you wouldn't find in other games. Most notably is the control you have over a magical essence known as Synergy. Essentially, Synergy could be used alongside other characters' abilities to do different buffs, abilities, and even summonings. The attacks that could be used with Synergy created some really awesome visuals despite the game appearing on the Game Boy Advance. In fact, the Synergy ability kind of reminded me of the same powers that the Green Lantern uses. Anyway, this power could also be used to solve puzzles outside of combat as well, in the form of moving obstacles and creating new pathways to explore. As for the story, this was something else that really hooked me when it came to Golden Sun. With a story that started out as your typical fantasy game with the main hero Isaac leaving his small town to go on a journey that ultimately turns into something much more complex yet captivating, it's really hard to walk away from this game without being satisfied with the entire story. Overall, this game absolutely deserves a remake, and I actually don't mean a 2D HD remake. This is the type of game that, in my opinion, would do really well as a full-blown modern remake, but still in the turn-based mechanics. Think Lost Odyssey or the upcoming RPG Expedition 33. And yeah, I know we technically got Golden Sun and its sequel added to the Nintendo Online store for the Switch, but come on, this game is way too incredible to do a port and leave it at that. Number 2, Chrono Trigger. If it wasn't for the fact that I'm a major fan of survival horror games, then Chrono Trigger would have claimed the #1 spot on today's list. And there's some foreshadowing for you guys there. Anyway, Chrono Trigger is without a doubt one of the best JRPGs of all time. This game is phenomenal. From the art design to the unique characters, all the way down to the incredible story and iconic set pieces of the game, Chrono Trigger is a game that definitely deserves more love than it gets. Seriously, for a game that's viewed as one of the best JRPGs of all time, and again, one of the best JRPGs of all time, you would think that we would receive a remake or a remaster at some point. And yes, I know technically we have received updated versions of Chrono Trigger on other consoles, but none of those versions are a full-blown remaster or remake. Yet that's not the case here. For some reason, Square Enix has left this game in the dark and hasn't given any attention to it at all. Sure, there's other major franchises that Square has to focus on, like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, but come on, this game would be perfect to get an HD-2D remake treatment of, like we saw with Dragon Quest III. In fact, I would almost prefer that this game get an HD-2D remake over the traditional modern remakes that Square Enix has done with Final Fantasy VII. Especially since Chrono Trigger is a game that I just feel like has a certain charm about it, and it's almost perfect as is. Regardless, if it's a full remake like Final Fantasy VII, an HD-2D remake like Dragon Quest III, or hell, even a good remaster, Chrono Trigger deserves some love right now, and it's honestly probably the most deserving game on this list that needs a remake. Number 1, Parasite Eve. If you found me because of my main channel, Nerd Space Games, then you probably already know that the only genre that I love more than JRPGs is survival horror. Well, Parasite Eve is a game created by Square Enix, or at the time, Squaresoft, that made the surprising decision to combine two genres that should have never worked together, survival horror and JRPG. Yet the result was incredible, as Parasite Eve to this day remains one of my favorite survival horror games outside of the Silent Hill and Resident Evil franchises. The main protagonist, Aya Brea, was a complete badass in the first 2 games of the series, and she was a character that gamers were able to connect with immediately. The first game of the series was more like your traditional turn-based action RPG, as the player would move Aya around the battlefield to strategically position her before attacking enemies with either her abilities or weapons. The second game definitely went more towards the survival horror direction, but still featured elements of RPG in it. Either way, both games are phenomenal for different reasons, and it's sad that it's very unlikely that we'll never see a remake or a remaster of these games. The reason I feel this way is because the writer of the Parasite Eve novel has openly stated how they were disappointed with the video game adaptation, and for that reason, it might be hard for Square Enix to retain the rights to remake either of the first 2 games. But hey, you know your boy is gonna be hopeful because man, I'm a major fan of both games. I'm definitely a bit biased in putting Parasite Eve here due to it combining survival horror elements with a Japanese role-playing game, but if you've ever played Parasite Eve, then you know exactly why this game is such a masterpiece that deserves to be remade for a new generation of gamers. But that does it for this episode of Fantasy Kingdom. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Parasite Eve the most deserving of a remake out of every JRPG out there, or is there a different game that deserves that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more JRPG content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Fantasy Kingdom. Take care.